A blue 1967 Rolls-Royce Phantom stood motionless under the lights of a mansion in the hills of Chapultepec. 12 certified specialists from 3 different countries had declared it dead. The 6.75-liter B8 engine, which once roared with the elegance of British high society, now remained silent, breaking the heart of a powerful man. But what this millionaire CEO didn't know was that just 11 miles away, in a forgotten workshop in the Guerrero neighborhood, there was someone with the gift of hearing what engines don't say, and that person was the last person he would ever expect to find. A 23-year-old female mechanic who had learned to speak the language of classic Rolls-Royces before she learned to apply makeup. Subscribe and comment on where you listen to us. Let me tell you, my dear friends, about a story that broke my heart and then put it back together again in the most beautiful way. It's about dignity, hidden talent, and the transformative power of respect earned with oil-stained hands in the heart of Mexico City, where smoke mixes with the aroma of tacos al pastor and the noise of traffic never rests, stood a small mechanic's workshop that seemed frozen in time. The rusty sign was barely legible. Rodriguez Auto Repair Shop, specialists in British classics since 1978. The olive green paint on the exterior walls was peeling, revealing layers from decades past. The corrugated metal gate creaked every time it opened, announcing the arrival of the few customers who still trusted this place forgotten by progress. But within those time-worn walls existed something that no modern workshop with its computers and digital diagnostics could match. Ancestral knowledge passed down from generation to generation. There worked Alejandra Rodriguez Mendoza, 23 years old, dark brown hair, always tied back in a practical ponytail stained with grease. Her honey-colored eyes could detect a worn part from 3 meters away. She wore a navy blue overall, 2 sizes too big, that had belonged to her grandfather, with the name Don Arturo embroidered on the chest, a name she wore with pride, even though it was not her own. Alejandra was not like the other girls her age who filled Instagram with photos of parties and trips. While they worried about the latest makeup trends, she could identify the exact year of manufacture of a Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow just by listening to its engine for 5 seconds. While they spent hours in beauty salons, she spent entire days under the chassis of a Bentley S2, adjusting the hydraulic suspension with a precision that would make the engineers at Crewe, England, cry with pride. It was a gift she had inherited from her grandfather, Don Arturo Rodriguez, who had been a true legend in the world of British classic cars for more than 4 decades. Don Arturo had worked in his youth at the Rolls-Royce factory in England during the 1960s, learning the secrets that only the original master mechanics knew. When he returned to Mexico in 1978, he brought with him not only specialized tools that were impossible to find in Latin America, but also the sacred knowledge of how these engines breathed, thought, and felt. Because for Don Arturo, Rolls-Royces were not mere machines. They were living beings with personality, temperament, and soul. Mija, Don Arturo had said to Alejandra when she was just 8 years old and already spending every afternoon after school in the workshop, watching every movement of those calloused hands that seemed to work magic. Rolls-Royces are like people in high society. They seem cold and distant on the outside, but if you learn their language, if you treat them with the respect they deserve, they will reveal secrets that no one else can see. Alejandra had grown up in that workshop that smelled of British motor oil, varnished wood from old boards, and genuine leather from historic seats. While other children collected dolls or toys, she collected knowledge. At age 10, she already knew the difference between the carburetor of a Silver Cloud and the injection system of a Silver Spirit. At 12, she could adjust the perfect timing of the valves on a 6.75L V8 engine with her eyes closed. Her father, Roberto Rodriguez, had worked alongside Don Arturo for 20 years. He was a competent mechanic, respected in the trade, but without the mystical gift that his father possessed. Roberto had been the bridge between the old generation and the new, the translator between ancestral knowledge and modern techniques. The Rodriguez family was not wealthy. The workshop generated just enough to survive in a city where classic British cars were becoming increasingly rare and owners preferred modern workshops with air conditioning and pretty receptionists. They lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment above the workshop, where the roar of engines was their lullaby every night, but they had something more valuable than money. They had purpose, They had legacy. They had the silent respect of true connoisseurs who knew that in that humble workshop an art was being preserved that was dying in the modern world. Alejandra developed a specific talent that even surpassed her grandfather's in certain respects. She could diagnose problems in classic Rolls-Royce engines through touch and sound in a way that seemed impossible. Her fingers ran over the engine components and detected microscopic irregularities that digital measuring instruments could not capture. Don Arturo called it seeing with your hands and listening with your soul. It was as if her senses were tuned to a special frequency that only high-end British engines emitted. She could touch a crankshaft and know if there was an internal stress fracture that would appear in 3 months. She could listen to a carburetor and detect a 2 millimeter deviation in fuel flow. By the time Alejandra turned 19, she was already capable of rebuilding a Rolls-Royce Phantom Zima engine from scratch. She understood the complexity of the hydraulic suspension systems that had revolutionized the industry in the 1960s. She could restore the delicate Lucas electrical systems that terrified modern mechanics accustomed to the simplicity of computerized circuits. She dreamed of the day when the workshop sign would read, Rodriguez Workshop, 3 generations of excellence. She imagined expanding the business, perhaps opening a school to teach other young people the secrets of classic British mechanics before they were lost forever in the digital age. But then came that horrible night in November 4 years ago. Don Arturo, at 76, was still working with the energy of a 50-year-old. That afternoon, he was under a 1961 Bentley Continental S2, adjusting the automatic transmission with the precision of a surgeon. Alejandra was at his side, handing him tools, learning the last secrets her grandfather had yet to teach her. My daughter had told Don Arturo with a tired smile, "This Bentley is going to be perfect. Tomorrow, when the owner comes to pick it up, he'll cry with happiness when he hears it roar." Those were the last words Alejandra heard him say. Don Arturo suffered a massive heart attack right there under the Bentley he loved so much. He died doing what he was most passionate about in the world, his hands stained with British oil and his heart full of pride for the legacy he was leaving behind. She was only 19 when her world fell apart. In a single night, she lost her grandfather, her teacher, her hero, the person who understood her best in the whole world. But the pain did not end there. 3 months after the funeral, her father Roberto suffered a stroke while working in the workshop. The doctors said it was accumulated stress, the pressure of keeping the business going without Don Arturo, the weight of carrying a legacy that seemed too heavy for his shoulders. Roberto survived, but was left partially paralyzed on his right side. He could no longer work with tools. He could no longer hold a wrench. He could no longer crawl under cars. The man who had dedicated his life to mechanics now spent his days in a wheelchair. Looking sadly at the workshop, he could no longer operate. His mother, Dolores Mendoza, had to find work as a domestic servant in the houses of Lomas de Chapultepec to pay for Roberto's medication and keep the family afloat. She worked 12 hours a day cleaning the mansions of rich people who treated her as if she were invisible, returning exhausted every night to the apartment above the workshop. Alejandra, barely 20 years old, was left alone in charge of the Rodriguez workshop, alone with the tools of 3 generations, alone with the inherited knowledge, alone with the reputation for excellence, which now rested entirely on her young shoulders. And the world was not kind to her. The old customers, those 70 and 80-year-old gentlemen who had trusted Don Arturo for decades, began to disappear. Some called to ask if there was a male mechanic available. Others simply stopped coming without explanation. "I need to talk to the mechanic," they would say when she answered the phone. "I am the mechanic," Alejandra would have replied with dignity. "No, I need to talk to a real mechanic, someone with experience." The words hurt every time, but Alejandra learned to swallow them and keep her head up. For 3 years, from the age of 20 to 23, Alejandra has struggled to keep her grandfather's legacy alive. The workshop generates just enough to pay the rent, basic utilities, and a small portion of her father's medications. Many weeks she eats only tortillas and beans because there is no money for anything else. Her clothes are the same 3 pairs of overalls her grandfather left her, washed and patched so many times that the seams look like road maps. Her hands, which her grandfather once called artist hands, are permanently stained with grease that cannot be completely removed even with the strongest industrial soap. Her nails are short and broken because long nails don't work when you work with engines. She has been wearing the same work shoes for 2 years, with soles so worn that she can feel every stone on the workshop floor when she walks. Her hair, which could be beautiful if she had time to take care of it, is always tied back in that practical ponytail stained with motor oil. The neighbors in the neighborhood respect her. They know she's a good mechanic, but the outside world, oh my God, the outside world sees her as a girl playing at being a mechanic, occupying the space that should be filled by a real man. Every night before going up to the apartment where her father waits in his wheelchair and her mother returns exhausted from cleaning other people's houses, Alejandra sits at her grandfather's old wooden desk, opens the drawer, and takes out a framed photograph. The photo shows three generations: Don Arturo at 70, Roberto at 42, and Alejandra at 15, all three standing in front of a completely restored Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud Cabriolet. All three smile with the pride that only comes from creating something perfect with your own hands. Grandpa, Alejandra whispers, touching the photo with grease-stained fingers. I don't know how much longer I can keep this alive. Customers don't trust me because I'm a woman. Banks won't give me credit because the workshop doesn't generate enough income. I'm so tired, Grandpa. So tired. Tears fall on the glass of the frame, leaving small, clean circles in the accumulated dust. But despite everything, despite the hunger, the exhaustion, the constant discrimination, the unpaid bills piling up on the desk, Alejandra has never abandoned the tools that three generations of Rodriguez have used to create mechanical miracles. Every morning she gets up at 6 a.m., puts on one of her grandfather's overalls, ties her hair back in a practical ponytail, and opens the doors of the Rodriguez workshop, hoping that maybe today the customer who will change everything will arrive. The job that will save her family's legacy, the opportunity that will show the world that talent has no gender. What Alejandra doesn't know is that that day is about to arrive, and it will come in the form of the most difficult challenge of her life. On the other side of town, in a three-story mansion in the hills of Chapultepec, valued at 87 million pesos, a very different man was facing his own nightmare. His name was Eduardo Santibáñez Villarreal, 48, CEO of Grupo Santibáñez Industrial, an empire that manufactured aerospace components for companies in the United States, Europe, and Asia. His company had annual revenues of 2.4 billion pesos and employed 3,200 people in 5 manufacturing plants. Eduardo had built that empire from scratch, transforming the small machine shop he inherited from his father into an international corporation. He was the kind of man who appeared in business magazines with headlines like Mexico's Industrial Genius or From Family Workshop to Global Powerhouse. He wore tailor-made Italian suits that cost 45,000 pesos each. His 890,000 peso Patek Philippe Nautilus watch sparkled on his left wrist. He drove an $8.2 million 2023 Bentley Flying Spur for his daily activities. But none of that mattered now, because in the climate-controlled garage of his mansion, under LED lights that cost 180,000 to install, a 1967 Rolls-Royce Phantom Semi lay completely dead. And that car was not just a collector's item, it was the last tangible piece of the person Eduardo had loved most in the world. His mother, Dolores Villarreal de Santibáñez. Doña Dolores had passed away exactly 6 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed and treated in 4 months. Eduardo had spent 14 million pesos on the best oncologists in Mexico, the United States, and Germany. Nothing worked. He watched her deteriorate day by day, her 82-year-old body wasting away, until there was hardly anything left of the strong woman who had raised him alone after his father died when Eduardo was 12. Before she died, Doña Dolores had asked him for only one thing. Son, she had said in a weak voice from her hospital bed, promise me you'll take care of your father's Rolls-Royce. That car was the only luxury we allowed ourselves when we started to become successful. Your father bought it for me in 1982, already used but perfect. He said I deserved to travel like a queen. Her eyes filled with tears as she remembered. Every Sunday, your father would take me for a ride in that Rolls-Royce. We would go to Cuernavaca, to Valle de Bravo, wherever. Those were our sacred hours, when it was just the two of us and the road. After he died, I continued to drive it every Sunday, feeling that he was still with me. Eduardo had taken his mother's fragile hand. I promise you, Mom, I'll keep it in perfect condition as if you were going to drive it tomorrow. But now, months after the funeral, the Rolls-Royce was dead. It had started making a strange noise 4 months ago, an irregular vibration in the engine when he accelerated. Eduardo, who knew nothing about mechanics but had all the money in the world, immediately called in the best specialists. First came Gustavo Hernandez from Premier Automotriz, the most expensive and prestigious repair shop in Mexico City. Gustavo had certifications from Germany and had worked in luxury repair shops in California. He charged 85,000 pesos just for the diagnosis. Mr. Santi Bañez, Gustavo had said after 3 days of analysis, this engine has multiple problems. The carburation system is unbalanced, the valves need complete rectification, and the camshaft shows critical wear. Total reconstruction, 1.8 million pesos. Estimated time, 6 weeks. Eduardo authorized the work without batting an eye. But after 6 weeks and 1.8 million pesos, the Rolls-Royce still wasn't working properly. Now the sound was worse. The second specialist arrived, Mauricio Contreras, from British Classic Cars Restoration. He had experience working in England. He boasted direct connections with the Rolls-Royce factory. What they did before is wrong, Mauricio declared authoritatively. The real problem is in the electrical system, Lucas. These British systems from the 1960s are notoriously problematic. We need to redo the entire electrical harness. 2.3 million pesos. Eduardo paid 3 months and 2.3 million pesos later. The Rolls-Royce was worse off. Now it wouldn't even start. The next specialist came in procession. A mechanical engineer from Monterrey charged 950,000 pesos to replace the entire transmission. A Rolls-Royce expert who flew in from Houston, Texas, charging $270,000 pesos just for the 3-day visit, plus 1.4 million pesos in urgent repairs. A classic car restorer from Germany who arrived with a team of 4 technicians. He set up shop in Eduardo's garage for 2 weeks, charged 4.2 million pesos, and left saying he had optimized the essential systems. In total, different specialists, all with impressive certifications, all charging fortunes, all promising definitive results. Eduardo had spent 12.8 million pesos on repair attempts over 6 months. And the 1967 Rolls-Royce Phantom 5, his mother's treasure, the last tangible link to his parents, remained completely dead in that climate-controlled garage as a constant reminder of his failure. Eduardo's frustration had grown into something dark and poisonous, the pain of losing his mother, which he never properly processed because he was too busy running his empire. Now it was mixed with a rage that he took out on everyone around him. His wife, Mariana, had left him 3 months ago. "You're not the man I married anymore," she had told him. "You've become cruel, bitter. You treat your employees like trash. You speak to me with contempt. You live obsessed with that dead car. You need help, Eduardo, but I can't stand by and watch you destroy your humanity." His 2 daughters, Sofia, 22, and Daniela, 19, barely spoke to him. They lived in Monterrey, studying at university, and only came to visit him at Christmas, fulfilling the minimum family obligation. Eduardo had become a bitter man who used his power and money as weapons to hurt others. At company meetings, he humiliated his executives. In negotiations, he crushed his suppliers. He was rude and contemptuous to his domestic staff. And every night after everyone left, and he was alone in that 87 million peso mansion that felt so empty, Eduardo would go down to the climate-controlled garage. He would sit in the back seat of the dead Rolls-Royce, surrounded by the smell of old British leather and varnished wood, and cry. "Mom," he would whisper in the darkness, "I failed you. I couldn't keep your promise. I spent millions and I can't bring your treasure back to life. I can't give you this, Mom. I can't give you anything." That Tuesday morning, Eduardo woke up with desperate determination. He wasn't going to give up. He was going to find someone, anyone, who could revive his mother's Rolls-Royce. He called his personal assistant, Gabriela Ramos, a 35-year-old woman who had put up with him for 8 years of increasing bad moods. "Gabriela," he ordered in a harsh voice, "I want you to search all of Mexico City. I don't care how small the workshop is, how unknown the mechanic is. Find someone who works with classic Rolls-Royces, someone who hasn't seen my car before." Gabriela, accustomed to carrying out impossible orders, spent the morning calling every workshop specializing in classic cars she could find. Most were places Eduardo had already contacted. But then, on page 7 of Google, she found an old reference in a 2019 British car collectors forum. If anyone knows about the Phantom Ps from the 60s, it's Don Arturo from the Rodriguez workshop on Guerrero. That old man worked at Crow. He knows secrets that no one else knows. Gabriella investigated further. She found that Don Arturo had died in 2021, but the workshop was still open. She called the number listed. Rodriguez Workshop, good morning, answered a young female voice. Good morning, I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Eduardo Santibanez. He has a 67 Rolls-Royce Phantom King with serious problems. Do you work with these models? There was a brief pause. Then the voice replied with a tone of barely contained excitement. Yes, ma'am. My grandfather worked at the Rolls-Royce factory in England in the 1960s. I learned from him. Phantom Pia cars are my specialty. Gabriella wrote down the address. Colonia Guerrero. She didn't even know where that was exactly. She hung up and went to report back to Eduardo. Mr. Santibanez, I found a workshop that claims to specialize in phantoms. Paint. It's small, it doesn't have a website, but they have direct experience with the original factory. Eduardo looked at her with tired eyes. Where is it? In Colonia Guerrero, sir. Eduardo knew enough about Mexico City to know that Guerrero was not exactly Polanco. It was a working-class neighborhood, nothing glamorous. That's the only place you found. It's the only one that hasn't seen your car yet, sir. And the person who answered said his grandfather worked on the crew. Eduardo sighed. His desperation overcame his prejudice. Give me the address. I'll have the Rolls-Royce towed there. If these guys fail too, his voice broke slightly, then maybe my mother's car really is dead forever. What Eduardo didn't know as he got into his Bentley to drive to the Guerrero neighborhood was that he was about to meet someone who would change not only the fate of his Rolls-Royce, but the entire course of his broken soul. Alejandra was under a 1969 Jaguar when she heard the unmistakable sound of a flatbed tow truck stopping in front of the workshop. The sound of hydraulic brakes, the idling of the diesel engine, the clanking of metal chains slid out from under the Jaguar, and she stood up, wiping her hands on her stained overalls. Through the half-open gate, she could see the tow truck parking on the narrow street of the Guerrero neighborhood, partially blocking traffic. What was coming on the platform made her heart stop completely. A 1967 Rolls-Royce Phantom Kimty, midnight blue with cream leather interiors, shiny chrome reflecting the midday sun, elegant lines that screamed British aristocracy in every inch of its bodywork. It was the most beautiful car Alejandra had seen in 3 years. It was exactly the type of vehicle her grandfather had restored dozens of times, the type of engine she had learned to rebuild piece by piece during her teenage years. Her hands began to tremble with pure excitement. This was the job she had been waiting for, the opportunity to prove that Don Arturo's legacy was still alive, that she had learned the lessons, that she deserved to bear the Rodriguez name. From the black Bentley flying spur that followed the tow truck, a man stepped out who immediately radiated power and money. He wore a dark gray suit that cost more than 3 months' salary at the workshop, Italian shoes that shone like mirrors, and stood with the upright posture of someone accustomed to having everyone obey his orders. Eduardo Santibanez looked around with an expression of obvious disgust. His eyes scanned the peeling walls of the workshop, the rusty gate, the old sign that was barely legible. This was nothing like the luxury workshops with shiny epoxy floors and waiting rooms with gourmet coffee, where he had spent millions in recent months. Alejandra approached with quick but respectful steps, her heart beating with hope. It had been 3 years since she had worked on a Rolls-Royce. This was her chance to honor her grandfather. "Good morning, sir," she said in a clear, professional voice, extending her hand in greeting. "I'm Alejandra Rodriguez. My assistant informed me that you stopped mid-sentence when Eduardo looked her up and down with an expression Alejandra knew all too well. It was the look that said, 'Are you serious?' Eduardo did not take her outstretched hand, simply ignoring her and turning toward the tow truck where his Rolls-Royce was being secured. "I need to speak with the mechanic," he said, without even looking at her. The words, so familiar, so painful, fell on Alejandra like stones. "I am the mechanic, sir," she replied, maintaining her composure with 3 years of practice. "My grandfather, Don Arturo Rodriguez, founded this workshop. He worked at the Rolls-Royce factory in Crewe, England, during the 1960s. I learned directly from him about the Phantom bit. Can I help you with that? Eduardo interrupted in a cold voice, finally turning to look at her directly. I need to talk to a real mechanic, a man with real experience. The blow was direct, but Alejandra had taken it so many times that she already had mental armor. Sir, with all due respect, I have direct experience with 6.75L B8 engines from that era. How old are you? Eduardo interrupted her abruptly. 22, 23, 23, sir. But I've been working with Rolls-Royces since I was 20, Eduardo repeated with a humorless laugh. My Rolls-Royce is 58 years old, more than half a century older than you. It's worth 12 million pesos. 12 million, do you understand? That's probably more money than you'll ever see in your entire life. Alejandra felt the heat rise to her cheeks, but she maintained her dignity. I understand the value, sir. The Phantom Cambi is extremely rare and valuable. That's why they need someone who understands their... Listen to me, girl, said Eduardo, approaching her with an expression of utter contempt. I've spent 12.8 million pesos in the last 6 months trying to repair this car. 12 certified specialists, people who studied in Germany, England, and the United States. People with 30, 40 years of experience. He paused dramatically, looking her up and down again. And you, a 23-year-old brat who works in this third-rate workshop in a neighborhood I didn't even know existed. You think you can do what 12 professionals couldn't? The words were pure poison. Alejandra could feel the neighbors starting to peek out, curious about the Rolls-Royce on the street, about the rich man yelling at the young mechanic. Don Chuy, the owner of the taqueria next door, approached slowly. He was a 60-year-old man who had known the Rodriguez family for decades, who had seen Don Arturo work miracles in that workshop. Young man, Don Chuy intervened in a respectful but firm voice. This girl knows what she's doing. Her grandfather was a legend, and she learned everything from him. I've seen the work. I didn't ask for your opinion, Eduardo cut in cruelly. This is between the girl and me. Don Chuy paused, hurt by the contempt, but he did not walk away. Other neighbors began to gather. Mrs. Marta from the grocery store, the Morales brothers who owned the bicycle shop, Jorge, the college student who lived in the building next door. Eduardo noticed the growing audience, and something dark awakened in him. The same cruel impulse he had been using to hurt his staff, his suppliers, anyone he considered inferior. He took out his $35,000 iPhone 15 Pro Max cell phone and started recording video. Friends, fellow businessmen, he said, looking directly at the camera with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I want to document this. I'm so desperate to repair my Rolls-Royce that I ended up at a workshop where a 23-year-old girl pretends to be a specialist in classic Rolls-Royces. He focused the camera on Alejandra, capturing her stained overalls, her dirty hands, her unkempt hair. Look at her. This is the specialist my assistant found. She works in a workshop that looks like it's going to collapse at any moment. Alejandra felt the humiliation burning in her chest, but her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. My daughter, when they underestimate you for being a woman, let your work speak for you, Mr. Santibáñez, she said in a firm voice, though she was trembling inside. I understand your skepticism. You've had bad experiences, but if you allow me to examine your Rolls-Royce, I can examine it. Eduardo laughed with genuine cruelty. You're going to examine a Phantom Vito? With what? Your dirty little fingers? The crowd of neighbors murmured uncomfortably. This was no longer a simple argument. It was deliberate public humiliation. Eduardo turned to the tow truck driver, a 50-year-old man named Tomas, who had remained silent, an uncomfortable witness to the scene. Tomas, lower the Rolls-Royce. I want everyone to see this. I'm going to give this girl a chance to prove her expertise in front of witnesses. The tow truck's hydraulic platform began to descend with a metallic squeal. The Rolls-Royce Phantom Quinta touched the street pavement gently. Its original 1967 tires were perfectly inflated. Its midnight blue paint gleamed like a giant sapphire in the sun. It was a vision of absolute elegance in the middle of the Guerrero neighborhood, like a British princess lost in a popular market. Alejandra approached the car with reverent steps. Her hands trembled, not with nervousness, but with pure excitement. It had been so long since she had touched a Rolls-Royce. Her grandfather always said that these cars had souls, that they had to be approached with respect. She placed her right hand on the hood, closing her eyes for a moment. It was the ritual that Don Arturo had taught her. What the hell is she doing? Eduardo asked incredulously. She's praying. Does she think magic is going to fix my car? But Alejandra wasn't praying, she was listening. Her fingers moved gently over the surface of the hood, feeling imperceptible vibrations, detecting microscopic thermal irregularities that spoke of internal problems. Sir, she said, opening her eyes, may I ask you some technical questions about your Phantom B? Eduardo sighed with theatrical exasperation. Go ahead, let's see how much you really know. Alejandra looked him straight in the eye. Your Phantom Fay has a 6.75 L B8 engine with an SU carburetor. Correct? What is the original factory compression ratio? It was a question designed to separate the real connoisseurs from the charlatans. The compression ratio of these engines was not in common manuals. Eduardo frowned. He had no idea what the answer was. I didn't come here for a test. I came here to have my car fixed. 9-1, Alejandra replied softly. The compression ratio is 9-1. It's critical to know this because many modern mechanics try to tune these engines using later model specifications and ruin the tune. There was a murmur of impression among the neighbors. Don Chewy smiled proudly. Eduardo, however, was not impressed. He was irritated that this girl was answering correctly. Okay, you memorized some numbers. That doesn't mean you can diagnose the real problem. Let me hear the engine trying to start, Alejandra requested. Eduardo walked toward the Rolls-Royce with an annoyed expression. He climbed into the driver's seat, the cream leather creaking softly under his weight. The keys were still in the ignition switch. He turned the key. The starter motor sounded loud and clear, a healthy noise indicating a strong battery and solid electrical connections. But the main engine did not respond. Not a bang, not an attempt to start, just the sound of the starter motor spinning empty. Eduardo tried 3 more times with the same result. He got out of the car with an expression of defeat that he quickly disguised with more anger. There you go, completely dead. 12 specialists couldn't do anything. They spent millions, replaced half the engine, redid the entire electrical system, and it's still just as dead. Alejandra nodded slowly, her mind already working on the diagnosis. Her grandfather had taught her that when many mechanics fail with the same problem, it's usually because they're looking for complexity where there is simplicity. Mr. Santibáñez, may I open the hood and examine the engine? That's why you came, isn't it? Eduardo replied sarcastically. Alejandra walked to the front of the Rolls-Royce and looked for the hood release mechanism. In the Phantom Kimbe, it wasn't obvious. It was hidden inside the front grille to maintain the elegant aesthetics. Her fingers found the exact latch in 3 seconds. The hood rose with that smooth, silent movement characteristic of British precision engineering. The 6.75 L B8 engine revealed itself before her eyes like a mechanical altar. It was immaculate. It had clearly been meticulously cared for. Every component gleamed. Every cable was perfectly organized. But Alejandra, with eyes trained since childhood, immediately noticed something that made her frown. The Seu carburetors had been replaced. In their place were modern Weir carburetors. Sir, she asked in a careful voice, who changed the original carburetors? Eduardo approached the engine. The specialist from Germany said that the Seu carburetors were obsolete and that the modern Weir carburetors would work better. It cost 480,000 pesos for the parts alone. Alejandra closed her eyes for a moment, feeling a mixture of sadness and frustration. Her grandfather had warned her about this. Exactly. Rolls-Royce engines from this era were designed specifically for carburetors. He explained in a soft but firm voice. It's not that the Webers are bad. They are excellent carburetors, but they are incompatible with the design philosophy of the 6.75 L engine. Eduardo looked at her with growing skepticism. The German engineer had 40 years of experience. Are you telling me he was wrong? Not wrong, Alejandra corrected respectfully. But the Webers operate on a different fuel delivery curve. This engine needs the smooth progressiveness of the SUs. The Webers are too aggressive, too modern for this classic design. She leaned over the engine, her fingers moving confidently among the components. She touched the intake manifold, felt the residual temperature, examined the fuel lines, the electrical connections. Besides, she continued as she worked, I see that the entire Lucas electrical harness was replaced with modern wiring. That was the German specialist too, wasn't it? It was the British team. It cost 2.3 million. Alejandra nodded, her diagnosis forming quickly. Lucas systems from this era have a specific electrical resistance. Modern wiring has different conductivity. This affects the ignition timing and the distributor signal. She straightened up and looked directly at Eduardo. Mr. Santibáñez, your Rolls-Royce is not broken. Its engine is perfectly healthy. The problem is that 12 specialists tried to modernize it, and in the process destroyed the original harmony of the design. The silence that followed was profound. The neighbors watched with fascination. Eduardo looked at Alejandra with a mixture of disbelief and growing irritation. Are you telling me, he asked in a dangerously low voice, that I spent almost $30 million pesos on repairs that actually broke my car? They didn't break it intentionally, Alejandra replied diplomatically. But yes, sir, basically his Phantom has excellent modern components installed in a classic engine that rejects modernity. It's like putting the heart of a modern athlete in a Victorian body, technically superior, but incompatible. Eduardo felt something break inside him. He had spent a fortune. He had trusted the best specialists in the world. And now this 23-year-old girl in a ramshackle workshop was telling him that they were all wrong. The rage that had been building up inside him for months exploded. You're a liar, he shouted in a voice that echoed down the street, a fraud who pretends to know more than engineers with decades of experience. He took out his phone again and started recording. Listen to this, he said to the camera in a voice full of venom. This girl says that 12 certified specialists were wrong, that the best mechanics in Germany, England, and the United States don't know what they're doing. But she, working in this hole, has all the answers. He turned to Alejandra with absolute cruelty in his eyes. You know what I think? I think you're a charlatan who learned a few technical terms to impress idiots. I think you have no idea what you're talking about, and I think women shouldn't pretend to understand advanced mechanics. The words fell like bombs. The crowd of neighbors stifled a collective gasp. Don Chuy stepped forward indignantly. Hey, young man, that's out of line, Eduardo roared. This isn't your problem, old man. He turned back to Alejandra, who was trembling not with fear, but with a complex emotion of pain, indignation, and fierce determination. I'm going to do something, Eduardo continued with a cruel smile. I'm going to give you a chance, but not because I think you can fix my Rolls-Royce, but because I want to document your failure. I want to record the exact moment you admit that you don't know anything. He took out his 18,000 peso Mont Blanc wallet and began counting 1,000 peso bills. Here's 50,000 pesos in cash, he said, showing her the wad of bills. They're yours right now if you admit in front of all these witnesses in my camera that you're not a real mechanic, that you're just playing with your grandfather's legacy, and that women should leave high-end mechanics to men. The offer was obscene, calculated to humiliate. 50,000 pesos was more than the workshop made in 3 months. Mrs. Marta, the owner of the grocery store, couldn't hold back any longer. That's an insult. This young woman is more professional than all of those you hired. But Eduardo ignored her completely. His eyes remained fixed on Alejandra, waiting to see her break, waiting for financial need to force her to humiliate herself. Alejandra looked at the bills. 50,000 pesos. She could pay for her father's overdue medications. She could buy decent food. She could pay part of the accumulated rent. But then she saw something else. The image of her grandfather, Don Arturo, appeared in her mind, standing in that same workshop, teaching her with infinite patience. My daughter, money comes and goes, but your dignity, your self-respect, no one can take that away from you unless you let them. Alejandra looked up at Eduardo. Her honey-colored eyes shone not with tears, but with a fire he did not expect to see. I will not accept your money to humiliate myself, Mr. Santibáñez, she said in a clear voice that everyone could hear. But I'm going to do something better. Eduardo frowned, surprised by her resistance. What are you going to do? I'm going to make a counteroffer, Alejandra replied with a courage she didn't know she possessed. If I can correctly diagnose your Phantom P and explain exactly what's wrong, exactly what you need in the next 30 minutes. She paused, her heart beating like a war drum. Then you will publicly apologize here in front of all these neighbors, in front of your camera. You will admit that you misjudged me for being a woman and for being young. The crowd murmured in surprise. Eduardo looked at her as if she had lost her mind. What if you can't? He asked with a malicious smile. Alejandra swallowed hard. This was the biggest gamble of her life. If I can't diagnose him correctly in 30 minutes, I'll close this workshop permanently. I'll publicly admit that I'm not worthy of my grandfather's legacy. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the noise of traffic seemed to have stopped. Don Chewy quickly approached Alejandra. My daughter, don't do this, he whispered urgently. You don't have to prove anything. This man is being cruel for no reason. But Alejandra had already made her decision. It wasn't just for her. It was for all the female mechanics who would come after her. It was for her grandfather. It was to prove that talent has no gender. Eduardo extended his hand with that cruel smile still on his lips. Deal, girl, 30 minutes and Tomas here. He pointed to the tow truck driver. He'll be the impartial judge. He knows engines. If your diagnosis is correct, I apologize. If you fail, you close your shop for good. Alejandro shook his hand. Eduardo's skin was soft, cared for with expensive creams. Hers was rough, stained with perpetual grease, marked by real work. 30 minutes, he confirmed. Eduardo looked at his Rolex. It's 2:43 p.m. At 3:13 p.m. we'll know the truth. And as Alejandra turned toward the Rolls-Royce Phantom TT, knowing that the next 30 minutes would determine not only her future, but the legacy of 3 generations of Rodriguez, a single word echoed in her mind. Grandfather, help me. A 1967 Rolls-Royce Phantom, midnight blue in color, stood motionless under the lights of a mansion in the hills of Chapultepec. 12 certified specialists from 3 different countries had declared it dead. The CEO, Eduardo Santibanez, had spent $12.8 million trying to revive it. That car was not just a vehicle, it was the last gift from his deceased mother, the promise he had been unable to fulfill. But what this millionaire did not know was that 18 kilometers away, in a forgotten workshop in the Guerrero neighborhood, there was someone with the gift of hearing what engines do not say. And that person was the last person he would ever expect to find, a 23-year-old female mechanic who had learned the secrets of Rolls-Royces directly from her grandfather, who worked at the factory in Crewe, England. Subscribe and comment on where you listen to us. Let me tell you, my dear friends, about Alejandra Rodriguez Mendoza, who worked at the Rodriguez workshop, a ramshackle place where the paint was peeling and the sign was barely legible. But within those walls lived a legacy of 3 generations specializing in classic British cars. Alejandra had lost her grandfather, Don Arturo, 4 years ago when she was just 19. 3 months later, her father, Roberto, suffered a stroke that left him paralyzed. At 20, Alejandra was left alone at the helm of the workshop, facing a world that did not trust a female mechanic. For 3 years, she had struggled to keep the family legacy alive. Customers disappeared when they found out she was the mechanic. She ate tortillas with beans because there was no money for anything else. Her mother cleaned other people's houses to pay for Roberto's medication, but Alejandra never abandoned the tools she had inherited, nor the knowledge her grandfather had passed on to her with infinite patience. Every night, looking at the photo of 3 generations of Rodriguez, she whispered, "Grandfather, I don't know how much longer I can keep this alive." That Tuesday morning, everything changed. Eduardo Santibanez, CEO of Grupo Santibanez Industrial, which had an annual turnover of 2.4 billion pesos, was driving his Bentley to the Guerrero neighborhood, following the address his assistant had found. He was desperate. His mother, Dolores, had died 6 months earlier of cancer. Before she died, she had asked him for only one thing: take care of your father's Rolls-Royce. That car was our only luxury, our sacred hours every Sunday. Eduardo had promised, but the Rolls-Royce had broken down 4 months earlier. 12 specialists had tried to fix it. A German engineer replaced the carburetors for 480,000 pesos. A British team rebuilt the electrical system for 2.3 million. A restorer in Houston charged 1.4 million. Nothing worked. Eduardo had spent 12.8 million pesos in 6 months. The car was still dead. Frustration had turned him into a cruel man. His wife, Mariana, left him. His daughters barely spoke to him. Every night he went down to the garage, sat in the dead Rolls Royce, and cried, "Mom, I failed you. I couldn't keep your promise." When the tow truck with the Phantom Kim arrived at the Rodriguez workshop, Alejandra came running out. Her heart beat with hope when she saw the most beautiful car she had seen in years. "Good morning, sir," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Alejandra Rodriguez. My assistant informed me." Eduardo looked her up and down with contempt. "I need to speak to the mechanic." The familiar words fell like stones. "I am the mechanic, sir. My grandfather worked at Crewe, England. I learned directly from him about the Phantom Bees." "No," Eduardo interrupted, "I need a real mechanic. A man with real experience. Sir, I have experience with 6.7L B8 engines." "How old are you?" 23, Eduardo laughed without humor. "My Rolls-Royce is 58 years old and worth 12 million pesos. Do you understand that amount?" The neighbors began to gather. Don Chuy from the taco shop, Mrs. Marta from the grocery store. Everyone knew Alejandra's talent. "Listen to me, girl," Eduardo continued, venom in his voice. "I've spent 12.8 million pesos. These certified specialists, people who studied in Germany, England, the United States. And you think you can do what they couldn't?" He took out his iPhone and started recording. "Business friends, document this. I'm so desperate that I ended up with a girl who pretends to be a Rolls-Royce specialist." He focused on Alejandra, capturing her stained overalls. "Look at her. This is the specialist." Don Chuy intervened. "Young man, this girl knows what she's doing. Her grandfather was a legend." "I didn't ask for your opinion," Eduardo roared. The crane operator lowered the Phantom Qui. Eduardo turned to the growing crowd with a malicious smile. "I'm going to give this girl a chance to prove her expertise in front of witnesses." Alejandra approached the Rolls-Royce with reverence. She placed her hand on the hood and closed her eyes. It was the ritual Don Arturo had taught her. "She's praying." Eduardo scoffed. "Do you think magic is going to fix my car?" But Alejandra was listening. Her fingers detected thermal irregularities that spoke of internal problems. "Sir, may I ask some technical questions? Your Phantom B has a 6.75L engine with an SU carburetor. What is the original compression ratio?" Eduardo frowned. He didn't know. "I didn't come here for an exam." 9 to 1, Alejandro replied. "It's critical to know because many modern mechanics use incorrect specifications." Eduardo, irritated that she was answering correctly, ordered, "Listen to the engine." He turned the key. The starter motor sounded healthy, but the main engine didn't respond, completely dead. 12 specialists, millions spent, and it's still dead, Eduardo said bitterly. Alejandra opened the hood. The engine was immaculate, but she immediately frowned. "Sir, who changed the original carburetors?" "Sue. The German specialist said that modern ones would work better. It cost 480,000 pesos. Alejandra closed her eyes, feeling sad. Rolls-Royce engines of this era were designed specifically for their Weselo, but incompatible with this design. Their fuel curve is too aggressive. He examined more components. The entire Lucas electrical harness had been replaced with modern wiring. That affects electrical resistance and ignition timing. He straightened up, looking directly at Eduardo. "Mr. Santibanez, your Rolls-Royce is not broken. Its engine is perfectly healthy. The problem is that 12 specialists tried to modernize it and destroyed the original harmony of the design." The silence was absolute. "Are you telling me," Eduardo asked in a dangerous voice, "that I spent 13 million on repairs that broke my car?" "Not intentionally, but yes, your Phantom Vibe has excellent modern components in a classic engine that rejects modernity." Eduardo exploded. "You're a liar, a fraud." He recorded again with his phone. "This girl says that 12 specialists were wrong, but she in this hole has all the answers." He turned to Alejandra with absolute cruelty. "You know what? I think women shouldn't pretend to understand advanced mechanics." He took out 50,000 pesos in cash. "It's yours if you admit that you're not a real mechanic, that you're just playing with your grandfather's legacy, and that women should leave this profession to men." Mrs. Marta shouted, "That's an insult." Alejandra looked at the bills, 50,000 pesos, her father's medicine, decent food, overdue rent. But then she saw the image of Don Arturo. "Mija, money comes and goes, but no one can take away your dignity." I'm not going to accept his money to humiliate myself, Alejandra said in a clear voice, but I will make a counteroffer. Eduardo frowned. If I can correctly diagnose your phantom PE and explain exactly what is wrong in 30 minutes, you will apologize publicly. You will admit that you judged me for being a woman and young. And if you can't, Alejandra swallowed hard, I will close this workshop permanently. I will admit that I am not worthy of my grandfather's legacy. Don Chui whispered urgently, Mija, don't do this. But Alejandra had already made up her mind. It was for all women mechanics, for her grandfather, to prove that talent has no gender. Eduardo extended his hand with a cruel smile. Deal. Operator Tomas will be the judge. If your diagnosis is correct, I apologize. If you fail, you close forever. He looked at his Rolex. It's 2:43. At 3:13, we'll know the truth. If you're enjoying this story, like it and activate the bell so you don't miss more stories like this. Alejandra walked toward the Rolls-Royce. Her hands stopped shaking when she touched her grandfather's tools. She opened his rusty box and took out a multimeter that Don Arturo had bought in England in 1965. Old tools for old engines. First, she examined the Weber carburetors delicately, disconnected the fuel lines, and measured the pressure. Her fingers moved with surgical precision. The primary problem, she explained as she worked, is that the Webers deliver fuel in aggressive pulses. The original SUs did it progressively. This engine needs that smoothness. Then she checked the modern electrical wiring. She took out a worn diagram that her grandfather had drawn by hand decades ago. The Lucas cables had a specific resistance of 0.8 ohms per meter. This modern wiring has 0.3 ohms. It seems better, but it completely alters the timing of the distributor. Tomas, the tow truck operator, approached, fascinated. Miss, I've been moving cars for 30 years. I've never seen a diagnosis like this. Alejandra moved to the distributor. Her fingers touched the internal contacts. Here's the critical problem, she announced. Someone adjusted the distributor advance using modern specifications. This engine needs 8 degrees before top dead center. It's set to 12 degrees. She took out a special timing wrench, a tool that looked handmade. My grandfather made this tool specifically for the Phantom 5, the exact geometry to reach the adjustment screw without damaging adjacent components. The crowd watched in religious silence. Even Eduardo had stopped teasing, watching with a complex expression. Alejandra worked with absolute love. Each adjustment was a prayer. Each calibration honored Don Arturo. The Lucas ignition system, she explained as she adjusted it. It works with a low-voltage coil. Modern mechanics installed high-voltage coils thinking they were better, but they generate sparks that are too hot and burn the spark plugs prematurely. She checked the spark plugs exactly as she predicted. Burnt electrodes. I have original Champion NBI spark plugs in stock. My grandfather always kept a stock of critical parts. He ran to the workshop and returned with a dusty box. Spark plugs from 1967, perfectly preserved. He installed them with exact torque. 25 pound-feet, no more, no less. Tomas looked at his watch. 8 minutes left, miss. Alejandra took a deep breath. The final moment had arrived. Mr. Santibáñez, your Phantom P needs 3 things to live again. First, reinstall sub-original carburetors. Second, restore the electrical harness. Lucas, with the correct resistance. Third, readjust the distributor and change the spark plugs I just did. Eduardo looked at her with an indecipherable expression. The first 2 require parts I have in stock. It would take 96 hours of work. But what I just did, she pointed to the engine, should at least allow it to start. Are you saying it will start? No, completely. It will run irregularly with the Weaver, but it will start, proving that the engine was healthy all this time. Tomas looked at his watch. 3 minutes. Eduardo walked slowly toward the Rolls-Royce and climbed into the cab. The cream leather creaked under his weight, that sound his mother loved so much. He put his hand on the wooden steering wheel and closed his eyes. Mom, if this is really the moment, please. He turned the key. The starter motor sounded once, twice. And then, after 6 months of absolute silence, the 675LB8 engine roared back to life. It wasn't a perfect roar. It was uneven, causing inconsistent explosions. But it was the sound of life, the sound Eduardo thought he would never hear again. The engine was running. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Don Chewy hugged Mrs. Marta. The neighbors hugged each other excitedly, but Eduardo did not celebrate. He sat in the Rolls-Royce with his hands clenched around the steering wheel, crying. Thick tears ran down his cheeks as his mother's engine roared beneath him. All the pain of 6 months, all the guilt of not being able to keep his promise, all the bitterness he had used to hurt others, shattered like glass. Mom, it's Zaba. Your car is alive. Your treasure is breathing again. He turned off the engine and got out with trembling legs. He walked straight toward Alejandra, who was watching him with an expression of genuine compassion. And then, in front of all the witnesses, in front of the camera that was still recording, Eduardo Santibáñez Villarreal fell to his knees on the dirty pavement of the Guerrero neighborhood. "Forgive me," he said in a broken voice. "My God, forgive me." Alejandra stepped back, overwhelmed. "You have a gift that I was blind to. 12 professionals couldn't do what you did in 30 minutes. His voice broke completely. "And I humiliated you. I insulted you for being a woman. I treated you like trash when you are extraordinary." He got up slowly. "Not just for today. Forgive me for everything I've been. I lost my mother and used that pain to justify my cruelty. But you," his voice trembled, "you gave me back more than the roar of your car. You gave me back hope." Alejandra, with tears in her own eyes, spoke softly. "Mr. Santibáñez, I accept your apology, but you need to understand. Your pain does not justify hurting others." "I know," Eduardo admitted, completely. He took a deep breath and made a decision. "Alejandra Rodriguez, I want to offer you something. Not charity, but the recognition you deserve. You need 96 hours for complete restoration. I will pay you 12 million pesos. The crowd gasped. "Not for the work," Eduardo continued. "That's worth maybe 180,000 pesos in parts and labor. The 12 million is for giving me back something I thought was lost forever." Alejandra looked at him with incredulous eyes. "Sir, I can't." "You can and you must," Eduardo interrupted firmly. "But there's more. I want to invest in this workshop. An additional 3 million to modernize the equipment, expand the space, create a center of excellence in classic British cars." He turned to the camera, which was still recording. "And I want this to be seen throughout Mexico. I, Eduardo Santibáñez, was completely wrong. Talent has no gender. Excellence is not measured by expensive diplomas, but by real knowledge." Don Chewy began to applaud. The crowd followed him in an ovation that echoed throughout the street. Alejandra broke down emotionally. She fell to her knees, hugging her toolbox, sobbing. "Grandpa," she whispered, "are you seeing this? We did it." 96 hours later, on a sunny morning, the Rolls-Royce Phantom Vinto roared with absolute perfection. Alejandra had reinstalled the original carburetors, restored the Lucas electrical harness, and adjusted each system to 1967 specifications. Eduardo arrived with his entire family, including Mariana, who had agreed to give him another chance. His daughters Sofia and Daniela, proud of the change in their father. "Miss Rodriguez," Eduardo said with genuine humility, "would you accompany us on the first trip?" Alejandra got into the Rolls-Royce. The cream leather was like clouds. Eduardo drove smoothly through the streets of Mexico City, the engine purring with perfect British elegance. "My mother would have loved to meet you," Eduardo said with emotion in his voice. She also had to fight against a world that underestimated her. She built a family business when women entrepreneurs were a rarity. 6 months later, the Rodriguez workshop had been completely transformed. A modern 500-meter building with state-of-the-art equipment. The sign now read Center of Excellence. Rodriguez Santibáñez, preserving British legacies. Alejandra led a team of 12 mechanics. 8 were young women who had arrived thanks to the scholarship program she herself had created, Future Mechanics of Mexico. Her father, Roberto, visited the workshop every day from his wheelchair. Her mother, Dolores, had stopped cleaning other people's houses and now ran the office. Eduardo visited every week. He had become a mentor and friend. Her relationship with her family had healed. Her bitterness had been replaced by purpose. "Do you know what's most incredible?" Eduardo said to Alejandra one afternoon as they watched a new Bentley S3 arrive for restoration. "It wasn't just that you fixed my mother's car. You fixed my broken soul." Alejandra smiled, touching the charm with the photo of Don Arturo that she never took off. My grandfather always said that engines and people are similar. Sometimes they just need someone who knows how to listen to what is really wrong. Every Sunday, Eduardo drove the Phantom P, just like his mother used to. And sometimes Alejandra accompanied him, feeling that Don Arturo was traveling with them in spirit. The story of the young mechanic who was publicly humiliated and who transformed cruelty into redemption spread throughout Mexico. Newspapers, magazines, documentaries. Everyone wanted to tell her story. But for Alejandra, the most important achievement was much simpler. She had preserved the legacy of 3 generations. She had proven that talent has no gender, and she had helped a lost soul find its way again. And so, my dear friends, ends this story of dignity, talent, and the transformation that occurs when respect replaces prejudice. Because sometimes all it takes is the roar of an engine to awaken the humanity dormant in a broken heart. Thank you for joining us until the end. Don't forget to subscribe and watch the other stories on screen. M.